A very good morning to one and all present here. And today we are here with IVDR Celebration Week, Session 2, where we are going to talk about IVDR regulations and clinical requirements for IVD manufacturers in the European Union. And in today's session, we are having our resource partner from Xenon Health Solutions, Liz, who is joining us today and going to give more information on clinical requirements. And not to forget, we have Greer Deal from Global Regulatory Services and Media, who is going to talk about the IVD regulations and some important discussions as we will be moving on. So, hello, Greer. Hello, Liz. How are you today?
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you. Yes, we're doing good.
And I'm sure all of us are excited for this session. Before we move in, I want everyone to remember that this is IVDR Celebration Week, brought to you by Media, powered by Global Regulatory Services, with our resource partners, which includes Galway Chamber, Medilink Midlands, Fortieri Development, Xenon Health Solutions, GS1 Ireland, Health and Innovation Hub Ireland, and Embassy of India, Dublin, Ireland. So all our friends are helping us make IVDR more accessible and preparing you all to be ready for hashtag IVDR ready. So yes, let's move into the session. So following on what was going on yesterday, we had the opening ceremony and we had an overview of IVDR. And today we are going to drill down into the clinical requirements that an EU IVD manufacturer needs to keep in mind. So with regards to IVD regulations, Greer, my question to you today will be, are they a big concern for EU manufacturers or for non-EU manufacturers?
Well, that's actually a very easy one to answer. It's applicable to both, because if you're already in Europe, obviously you have to comply with the EU regulations anyway. But for non-EU manufacturers, if you're wanting to sell into the market, then yes, again, you need to comply with the IVD regulations. But it doesn't necessarily mean as a non-EU manufacturer, you actually have to set up an entity in Europe. You can actually appoint an EU authorized representative who will represent you to the authorities, to Europe. And that is actually a legal role now under the regulation. Previously under the directives, it was just a post box, and there was no real legal obligation other than just being like a facilitator or the communication channel with the authorities. But under the regulation now, your EU authorized representative is equally liable with the legal manufacturer for any diagnostics placed on to the European market, and that is a service that we offer through Media, and is one of the key reasons why we actually set up Media in the first place, was to be able to provide this particular role to non-EU manufacturers. And of course, in the meantime, we've had the UK exit from Europe, so Media very much on hand to support UK manufacturers to maintain their market in Europe. So big changes ahead in terms of the regulation, big hoops for diagnostic companies to jump through, because previously under the directives it was fairly light touch in terms of compliance with regulation. But under the new regulations coming in on the 26th of May, 2022, there are going to be far more obligations, and more of the diagnostic companies, or the majority of them, are going to need to engage with a notified body. And they're the bodies that act on behalf of the competent authorities of the EU member states. So big change applies to any company that wants to sell their diagnostic into Europe.
That's interesting. And I'm sure in the beginning of the session, I did mention about clinical requirements. And that brings me, I'm going to soon ask questions to Liz as well. But before I ask any questions, Liz, would you take a moment to introduce yourself and your company so that our audience exactly know where they need to go if they have any clinical requirements for their devices?
Thank you, Jay. So my name is Liz Tully and I'm a managing partner of Xenon Health Solutions, and we're an Irish company based in Dublin that provide health and research services, advisory and consultancy around the kind of med tech space and around the kind of clinical strategy space.
Okay, that's interesting. So again, for all our viewers, if you want to develop a clinical strategy or have any clinical requirements, you can see the website is down there, and feel free to connect with them with Xenon Health Solutions, and they will be there to help you out. Okay, so Greer, the next question to you will be revolving around preparations. So what is it? What does an EU IVD manufacturer need to keep in mind to make sure that the product is fully compliant?
Yeah, so under the new regulation, which is what this week is all about, there is much more emphasis on clinical evaluation, or specifically for diagnostics performance evaluation. So how does your device diagnostic perform in the clinical setting? And you need to be able to basically provide the evidence that supports any claims that you make about your diagnostic. So, I mean, our core focus is regulatory affairs and quality compliance. So, when you want to make sure you're compliant with the regulations, it's very important to develop a regulatory strategy. But when you're looking at the clinical side and being able to gather the right evidence, then you also, in addition to your regulatory strategy, you need a clinical strategy, which is going to look at, what are you trying to say about your diagnostic, or what do you want to say, and how do you prove it? And, what are your endpoints and who is your target population? So you're looking at the intended purpose of the diagnostic. You're looking at what environment it's going to be used in. So is it in the home setting? Is it going to be used by professional healthcare people? So, is it in the hospital, or is it only going to be in labs? So all these things, and also you've got to think about the complexity of the technology, and is there any software involved? Is it doing anything that's analytical, and is that actually a diagnostic? You've got to make sure that it meets the definition of being a diagnostic under the IVD regulation. So you'll find that the switch from the old directive to the regulations is actually going to lead to a lot of diagnostics being up-classified in the risk classifications. So that means now that there's much more emphasis on being able to clinically prove that what your diagnostic, you say your diagnostic can do, actually can do it. So you've got to develop that clinical strategy to ensure that you cover all the points that you need. And I think I would add something to that, because we're obviously focusing on Europe here, but whilst you're doing all this, if you have to do it, you should be looking at what other markets you might be wanting to enter. So are you thinking about the US? Are you thinking about, further into the East? In which case, look at the evidence that you're gathering today and generating to see how that can help you access those other markets. And again, that all boils down to your clinical strategy and your other strategy documents too.
That's going to be interesting, because you mentioned about clinical strategy, and we have Liz who is going to talk about it later. But and I had a follow-up question from our session yesterday, where during one of the sessions you mentioned about PRRC, and I got a query later via email, and someone has asked, what is a PRRC? So would you be able to throw some light and explain our audience what exactly a PRRC would have to do? And what should a manufacturer look when the company is appointing a PRRC?
Okay, so a PRRC is a whole new role that's being brought in by these new regulations. So that's for medical devices and diagnostics. To be honest, there's not a huge amount of guidance at the moment. And so the authorities themselves are feeling their way through all of this, as well as people like us who are offering that service. What is important to note is that not everyone can outsource the role. Manufacturers must meet the criteria of being either a micro or small enterprise, and then they can outsource that particular role. If they're any larger than that, then they actually have to appoint people in-house. Now, the phrase is person responsible for regulatory compliance, but you can actually have several PRRCs, and you can appoint them to sort of like different groups of risk classification or different types of diagnostics, and they can cover for each other. Now, they've got to be always readily available, and they must have the right qualifications. So if you can just share your screen, actually I've got a slide that talks about the qualifications. So it's qualifications and experience. And if anyone wants a copy of this, then you can drop us a note, and we'd be happy to share this. But basically, you're looking at certain criteria, certain qualifications, all years of experience in the sector, and ideally with that particular type or risk classification of the diagnostic. So so definitely you need all of that experience, and these people, unlike the EU authorized representative, there is no legal obligation. They don't share liability with the manufacturer. Their responsibility is to ensure that the company that they're working in or with is complying with the regulations. So they are advising, guiding, giving direction, and making sure that, for example, the device, when before it's released onto the market, actually complies with the specifications. Now, they don't necessarily have the sign off on it, but they ensure there's a process in place that makes sure that that diagnostic meets the specifications before it's released onto the market. So it's an extra step in ensuring safety of these products. And if you remember, yesterday I was talking about, why bother with regulatory affairs? It's very much about ensuring quality, safety, and efficacy. And safety basically is not just the person receiving the diagnostic, but also the person using it. So like the healthcare professional, and making that sure that's all safe. So the person responsible for regulatory compliance, whole new role, very focused, clues in the name, on regulatory and ensuring that the company is compliant with the requirements. Interestingly, your PRRC is not just for the manufacturer, excuse me, but is your EU authorized representative must also have their own PRRC. And according to the regulations, if they are a micro or small company, then they can outsource that role. So you could actually engage subcontractors to be the PRRC. So it can be an individual rather than with an EU authorized representative. It's the entity could be a legal entity, which is the company, or an individual, but a PRRC is an individual. So it makes sense that you have at least one, but if you want full cover, then you'll need several. And that's where it's quite handy to go to a consultancy who will have several PRRCs that meet the requirements for qualifications and experience.
Okay, thank you so much for answering that question, and I hope our audience have all the answers now related to a PRRC. And I would request you to keep the screen just there for a moment. If anyone wants to take a screenshot, maybe for their internal use, please feel free to do that. And yes, if you have more questions around any of these topics, feel free to put them in the comment box or drop an email at mdd@mddltd.com, and I or any of our experts will be there to help you with all the answers related to your query. Okay, so in the initial start of the run, Greer was mentioning about a clinical strategy. So Liz, my question to you will be, what exactly is a clinical strategy?
Well, thank you, Jay. So as Greer mentioned, IVDR is a just more stringent ecosystem for diagnostics than has existed previously. And now companies are going to need to comply with notified body requirements rather than self-certifying. And there's going to be a lot of up-classification for existing diagnostics. And if you think about it, prior to these changes, only around 10% of IVDs were under notified body scrutiny. We estimate it's going to be over 80% now. And this obviously can be a very, very daunting expectation for manufacturers that don't have in-house experience of how to develop a clinical strategy. So a clinical strategy is simply a strategy to help prepare your clinical evidence for assessment so that it will fulfill these requirements. So manufacturers now need to ensure that there is adequate evidence available to meet the requirements of the regulations. But how do you do that? If you're starting from a point where this is all new to you. So really, it means that you need to look at your product, as Greer has mentioned, and its intended purpose and how and where you want to market that product. And looking at the evidence that you already have and formulating a plan to fill the gap so that you will be able to fulfill the regulations. And identifying, I guess, any additional expertise you may need to fulfill the notified body requirements. You're going to have to complete a performance evaluation report, and this needs to be planned very, very carefully because it's going to involve performance data, clinical evidence, scientific validity, analytical performance. So it's really sitting down with somebody who has the expertise, and again, that may come from in-house training. It's working very closely with your regulatory support and planning that very, very carefully.
Okay, that's interesting. So now, of course, the clinical strategy is going to be a very integral part right at the beginning of your product development. So I have a question is, how can an EU IVD manufacturer make sure that they are following the right clinical strategy? How to make sure?
I think the very, very first step in all this is to just look at your device classification. As we know, runs from A to D, and A is the lowest and D is the highest. And the D classified devices are going to have an awful lot of more data. So as your complexity and the risk involved to individual or public health increases, so does the evidence required increase, and the scrutiny that it's going to be under also increases. So although all devices need performance evaluation reports that are subject to notified body involvement, the level and degree of evidence required is relevant to the class. So classification is a really, really good starting point. And after that, you need to prepare a performance evaluation plan. And the criteria, as I mentioned, involved in that is the scientific validity, the analytical performance, and the clinical performance. And this involves taking everything that you already have, all your technical specs and info, any existing clinical performance data that you have, looking at existing standards relative to your diagnostic device, looking at clinical guidelines, looking at where and how you want to situate this device in the market.
Okay, so that's going to make sure that our manufacturers are making it right. But before they make it right, what would be the starting point of a clinical journey?
I think the starting point is to look at your device and update and look at the technical documents that exist and look at the existing clinical performance data. What are the recognized standards pertaining to the technology? Does the clinical evidence support the intended use? Do you need to procure more evidence, or are the notified body going to be happy with what you already have? And the answer on the whole is going to be no, because we need more evidence. So a really good starting point as well, if you need to do a clinical performance study, is looking at ISO 29116, which is the performance evaluation data for preparing a clinical evaluation. And the goal of performing a clinical evaluation is to prove that your device is safe and effective and intended for its intended use and fit for purpose. So this will help you devise a performance evaluation plan.
Okay, so yes, now they have a starting point. They have a clinical regulatory strategy roadmap, and I'm sure the manufacturers who are joining the session, they know where to go if they require more solutions. Of course, they need to log on to xenonhealthsolutions.com, and I'm sure our partners, resource partners, will be there to help you with your clinical strategies. So, Greer, now next question would be revolving around PRRC again. And I'm emphasizing a lot on PRRC because there is a lot of traction going on with this. So would the companies have PRRC right at the beginning of their innovation? So is it something that they should have at the start, maybe at the beginning of the clinical journey or something like that, or they can appoint a PRRC later?
Yeah, what's interesting is that because it's a whole new role, companies are sort of looking at the PRRC and we'll deal with that later. Please don't.
No.
It really is needed right from the start.
For sure.
And the reason is, even the design and development, are you doing it to the requirements? and you're going to be feeding all that evidence into your design history file, which then is going to feed into your technical file, which if it requires notified body, then they're going to review that. And also the other aspect is your quality management system. The PRRC, not necessarily the quality manager, but they are ensuring that the process is there, the systems are there, that there is an appointed quality manager or someone responsible for quality, certainly, who is the go-to person from outside the company and within the company. So it's kind of like I suppose the PRRC is a bit like the conductor for an orchestra. They're standing up in front of all these people and coordinating all their efforts. So, and as long as it's all in tune, great. You're going to have a wonderful company and product at the end of it all. But you might find that the wind instrument section is out of tune slightly. So the PRRC is responsible for bringing them back onto track, which basically is being compliant, and they really do need to be there at the outset. It is so difficult to bring someone in when lots of decisions have already been made. And to try and unpick all of that is time consuming and really costly. And actually, if you've got so far down the line, you may not be able to unpick it. You may actually have to carry on with what you've got. And what you've got isn't always enough. It often isn't robust enough either. So the sooner you get your PRRC in place, and bearing in mind the criteria of their qualifications and experience, make sure they've got that, because otherwise, if you've got a complete novice, you'll be in breach of the regulation anyway. But, how are they going to make sure that you can perform effectively and in compliance with the regulations? So please, right at the beginning.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Liz.
Well, it just makes everybody's job easier. It makes the manufacturer's job easier. It makes the sponsor. It makes anyone who's helping you with clinical strategy. It makes everyone's job easier if we're all on the same page. If you're singing from the same hymn sheet, and if you're going down the same path.
Exactly. Yeah. And the thing is that a lot of these companies, I have to say, they're very small companies, and they're constantly looking at their overheads. So they see, having to appoint a PRC, whether it's employing someone else, another employee, so contributing to their headcount, or whether they're contracting that out. They always see it as a cost. But Liz, as you've just said, actually this is an investment in your business. Absolutely. And you'll get it right from just about right. We're all learning this process right now, but you will get it as right as you can from the beginning. And basically you're putting down strong foundations to build a robust company and to be able to develop high quality, safe diagnostics for the future.
Absolutely. And I think as well, the language can be so, as we said before, daunting for people who are not familiar. The regulatory language around clinical performance, even, I suppose, liaising with the notified bodies and the competent authorities. That's such an important point. There are our friends. They're there to help and assist. And certainly my experience in Ireland with the HPRA has been nothing short of fantastic, And we really need to have a commonality in language when we're talking to these people. So if you engage with people who can support you, it's going to make that journey easier.
Yes, and just to expand a little bit more on that Liz, I do talk about, the companies themselves, they live and breathe their technology. They are the specialists with their technology.
Absolutely.
But when it comes to regulatory, trying to convert that knowledge and their wording into something that is understood by the regulators and can build confidence in your company and your technology by the regulators, you need that person who can speak the language of the regulator. So whether that, if that's your PRRC, great. They are that, well, like I was saying, they're the conductor of the orchestra. Yeah. They understand all the parts that different people play, and they can interpret and deliver the right messages to the regulators, but also feed back to the company in a way that they understand as well.
Absolutely. And then even from a clinical perspective, you mentioned you have to look at your end use and your setting. So, deciding how and where you want to evaluate the performance of your diagnostic, getting through that and teasing out the best way to do this and to gather that evidence. Your clinical experts can help you with that in association with your regulatory people, and can go back and forth with your notified bodies to really make sure that you're going to get the best performance evaluation of your product that will fulfill the criteria, that will get it out on the market and making money for you quicker. And that's really the bottom line.
Yeah, exactly. And the notified bodies and the competent authorities, like you're mentioning, the HPRA, have been absolutely fantastic. They really are there to support the industry, and seek guidance from them, seek their input, work with them.
Sure.
They're not sort of big daddy sitting on your shoulder going, no, you can't do this, can't do that. They are there to help support a successful sector, basically, for the benefit of the patients and healthcare systems.
Yeah, and we're so lucky in Ireland. We have such a vibrant landscape in this area that let's tap into the expertise. Let's not try and reinvent the wheel. Let's all help each other that we can actually get things moving. Especially with this kind of time of change around IVDR.
Exactly. Thanks, Liz.
And that was quite interesting. And for a moment, I thought I should drop off this call and I would let you both. Yes, that was good. I'm sure that this is exactly why we have organized this IVDR Celebration Week, because we want companies to be IVDR ready. And so why is this scheduled 1 month prior to the execution date, or the day when they are enforceable, is to make sure that companies have a right roadmap at least 1 month prior. Even it's never late. Or someone would say it's quite late, but again, they have enough time to prepare. So definitely for all our audiences who are worried about getting ready, well, you have all the email IDs. Just drop us an email and all of us will be there to make sure you are #IVDR ready. Yes, so from following on to the discussion that Liz and Greer just right now had, there was one thing that I was wondering regarding clinical strategy. And Liz, would you be able to highlight what are the common pitfalls that affect the clinical routes of different products?
I think it's really funny. We're going to be talking about the same things over and over again here, but it's kind of defining how you understand what sufficient evidence is. That's what the regulation says: gather enough sufficient evidence. So your regulatory expert and your clinical expert is going to help you understand that for your own individual device. And this is not a one size fits all. This has to be tailored, very specific to different diagnostics, to different use areas, to different, So how do manufacturers ensure this? So the common pitfalls is that the clinical evidence must support the intended use and be based on a continuous process. It's over the whole life cycle of the product. And it's not, as Greer mentioned earlier, that you compile all this evidence and pop it in a folder on the shelf. This is a lifelong process for the life of the device. And so to have sufficient expertise, and again, it comes back to sufficient budget to be able to continuously evaluate along the cycle. So a robust clinical strategy will certainly help you with that. And, the ability to be able to look at the state of the art and comparator products and make sure your performance is comparable or at the same level, looking at your standards, looking at harmonized procedures, looking at all the different things. And I come back to the ISO 20916, which is not it's voluntary compliance with that at the moment, but it's a really, really helpful guide when you're designing a clinical performance study, because it's got all of the different kind of pitfalls and things that you must consider. You need to look at your ethics, your contracts, your notified body compliance. You need to look at your data protection. You need to look at your use setting, this monitoring. There's so many, many different areas that if you get it right from the very, very beginning, it's going to save you so much time and energy.
And I think, can I just add in there that you mentioned the standards, being voluntary. And you also mentioned, Liz, earlier about not reinventing the wheel. To be honest, these standards are there to help. And, why try and do something different? The notified bodies expect people to follow these
So,
standards.
so they are voluntary, but are they
I know
really?
they're voluntary, but they do expect you to follow them because it provides you with structure. And Liz, you already said, why reinvent the wheel?
They're so helpful.
Yeah, exactly. It's there.
Yeah.
So you may as well follow it. And then you know that you're going to be compliant, but also that you're going to be developing things in an efficient and effective manner. So it's going to save you time in the long term.
Yeah, and also that it's easily reportable, that it's easily put together in a succinct and understandable way, that it's, that all of these things, are, as you said, if you want to move to other markets, that you're going to have a very robust evidence base for what you may need to do in the future. So the standards are integral to this.
Yeah, and the majority of the standards are international, so they are recognised internationally. So it does open up those markets, like you say, Liz. So,
Okay, that's again interesting to see how things are correlated and how things can be easy for not only for the manufacturers but for the wider members of the ecosystem. So again, we spoke about the pitfalls in the clinical pathway and a clinical strategy. So what steps can a manufacturer take to make sure they have to make sure to get it right? How can they get things right if they are affected by any of a pitfall?
Plan at the earliest opportunity, engage your regulatory people, engage your clinical strategy people, look at the holistic kind of effort here, do a risk assessment on the entire kind of expected use and where you want this device to go, and look to get training or external support if that's what you need. There's a lot of people out there that can help you, especially kind of, as you say, the legal aspect is so scary, but you don't need to suffer this alone. There are people who understand this and can help you. So I think that's getting it right is the planning.
Okay, I'm sure manufacturers have taken out their pen and paper and they're making notes about this. And again, this is a reminder for the audience. If you have any questions that you want any of our experts to answer, please use the comment box and we will be there to pick up those questions whenever time arises and be able to answer all your queries. Because again, we want to make sure you are IVDR ready. So, Greer, the next question comes to you is, you mentioned about PRRC, and then there was a mention of EU Legal Rep for clinical trials. Would you be able to give us a basic difference between a PRRC and an EU Legal Rep?
Yeah, so the PRRC, as I described earlier, is an individual who ensures a company is compliant with the regulatory requirements. So that's a sort of like day-to-day, everyday contact, ensuring that certain pathways are the diagnostic company is compliant with those pathways. One thing we didn't mention with clinical is that if you're a non-EU manufacturer, but you're wanting to run studies in Europe, then you do need a legal rep for clinical trials. And the legal rep for clinical trials isn't actually just for devices and diagnostics. It can be pharmaceuticals as well. But it has to be an entity in Europe, registered in Europe. And when I say an entity, again, that is an organization, preferably. Your PRRC, as mentioned before, is an individual, whereas your legal rep is an entity. Very often your clinical research organizations will act as the clinical trial legal representative. But basically their role is to be there to communicate with the authorities. So if an authority has a query about a trial, or maybe something's gone wrong, then the first point of contact can be the EU clinical trial legal representative. And if the authority contacts the legal rep, that is deemed to be communication with the legal manufacturer.
Yes.
So it's absolutely vital that the legal representative has a system in place whereby they can inform the manufacturer almost with immediate effect on receipt of any communication from the authorities. So So yeah, what in reality though, what happens is usually the competent authority will contact the legal manufacturer anyway and copy in the legal representative. so slightly different to how it's supposed to work, but yeah. But again, the clue is in the title. It is a legal responsibility. So there are certain elements of legal liability, and you need to make sure that the legal contracts are drawn up appropriately, which clearly defines the roles and responsibilities of all the stakeholders. So the legal manufacturer, what the role and responsibility is of the legal representative. So two very important roles, but very different responsibilities.
Yeah, and can I just add in there, Greer? So the legal representative for a clinical trial, has very, very serious responsibilities around reporting of adverse events.
Yeah.
And I think that's a real key issue there. So there's huge complexes. There's fantastic templates for European contracts. There's a lot of different, this is again not reinventing the wheel. There are people there that can help do this right from the start, and help draw up the contracts and whatever the organizations are involved. But that is often something that takes a lot more time than people think. So again, engage at the earliest opportunity.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, that's quite interesting.
And another thing, sorry, Jay, that within the contract you'll have a whole table of responsibilities. So it's really clear who is responsible for what within this study or within the exploratory piece that's been done. So it's very, very clear, and it's very important to get that right.
Yeah, and it's a service that Medidia does offer, but we don't say yes to everybody. We're very careful about who we represent. So so if anyone does ask, can you do, the answer is yes, but we need a lot of discussion and negotiation before we sign any legal contracts.
Well, there's a huge risk assessment to be done on that piece, obviously, because there's a lot of things that can go right, but a lot of things that can go wrong. So.
Yes, and thank you so much again, both of you. And as we're talking about things that can go right and things that can go wrong, Liz, I would like to ask a quick question to you, which will be, what are the 3 takeaways that you would like to give from today's session to all the manufacturers or people who have joined us in this entire session?
So number 1 would be have a robust clinical strategy at the earliest opportunity, work with people to develop that. Number 2, get sufficient expertise on board from early on and have strong communication with your regulatory support people. If you got those 3 things right, then you're on the right path.
That was quite quick and quite efficient. So I'm sure the manufacturers made a very straight away note, and they know exactly what they're supposed to do when 3 takeaways
it's communication. It's communication and just engaging at the earliest opportunity so that you can plan everything out and just get through all of these daunting requirements that are not so daunting when you get the right support.
Indeed. Yes, and Greer, I would like to ask the same question to you. What would be your quick 3 takeaways for our audience today?
Well, I was thinking about this and I thought, I'm going to go for 3 Ps. Prepare. So look at everything that you want to do, gather it all in together, then plan. So that's your strategies. So your clinical, your regulatory strategies, and then perform. So actually perform on those strategic documents. But then there's a last bit, which is revisit. So you revisit, go back to the beginning, because the whole process, as Liz mentioned earlier, it's not static. You don't put it on a shelf to gather dust. This is a living, dynamic process and needs to be constantly monitored and revisited. So yeah, prepare, plan, perform, revisit. That's the 4th one.
Okay, thank you so much. And yes, I'm sure our audience has had quite an interesting learn through from all of these sessions, that all the information that they just got. And I would like to take a moment to talk about sessions that are organized for tomorrow. So on Wednesday, 27th April at 11 a.m., we are going to bring you a session on IVD medical device, understanding software as a medical device and cybersecurity requirements under in vitro diagnostic regulations. And again, at 2 p.m. tomorrow itself, we are going to talk about IVD medical device and the need for UDI and barcodes. So if you can just go on any social platform, which includes Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube and search for hashtag IVDR Ready, and all the sessions will pop up directly to you. So, yes, we'll take the ultimate advantage. And if you have any questions in advance, you can transfer them either in the comments box right now, or you can send an email at mdd@mddltd.com, and I will make sure that all those questions are answered either during the session or you get a reply back from our experts. So, yes, thank you so much, Liz and Greer, for joining us today, taking time out of your busy schedules, especially when IVD is coming in. And yes, enlightening our audiences. Thank you once again. And a big thank you to all our resource partners and all of the teams that are working hard to make sure you are hashtag IVDR ready. And thank you to the audiences for listening to us and taking the information that you all want. Well, that's it for today's session. Is there anything else that Liz or Green would like to add?
No, just thank you for the opportunity to take part. It's been a really great week, great program. So thank you.
Thank you. It's been good to share.
Yeah.
Yes. So, well, that's all about the IVDR Celebration Week Session 2, where we spoke about the clinical strategy and the difference between PRRC and EU clinical legal reps. So, well, that's it. And stay tuned with us. We will be back tomorrow with another interesting sessions. Till then, take care and be hashtag IVDR ready. Thank you once again.